Hello and welcome to Aging is for Everyone. I'm Laura Mondello and I'm your host for the show. Is that big house feeling like too much for you this time of year? You've got to take care of shoveling and getting out into your car to go places. It's kind of tough, and it can also be tough if you're the caregiver and you have to go make sure that mom has enough food this time of year. But maybe it's time to think about changing where you're living. Well, today's show we're going to talk about different housing options for older adults here in Western New York. And I'm very happy to welcome our first guest, Kathy O'Brien, who is the Vice President for Housing Programs with Belmont Housing Resources of Western New York. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks so much for being with us today. You know, there's a lot of housing resources, and we're going to talk about different options tonight. But what about those folks who have maybe limited incomes and they're thinking, well, they want to move somewhere that's a senior housing option, but they just are worried about having enough money to afford it?
Well, actually, I think there's good news for people who find themselves in that situation, because there is quite a bit of affordable housing and in some cases subsidized housing for people who don't have a lot of resources. And maybe a good place to start is to define, you know, what does it mean to be low income? Because
right.
Some of these properties, you have to have an annual income that's below certain limits. So we're talking about housing that's available for people who have incomes that are in the neighborhood of $22,000 for one person or $25,000 for a two-person household, and that does not include any assets. You know, some people think they can't have money in the bank or they can't own a car. Those things are not counted when we look at household income. So we're talking about somebody who perhaps has an income around $1,800 a month between their Social Security and their pension. So this class of housing is available for folks in that income range. And the other thing is, what do we mean by affordable? You know, what should someone expect to pay for housing? The government has always said that it's reasonable to pay 30% of your monthly income for rent and utilities. So in the case of someone who has $1,800 or so per month, that might be $540, $550. And maybe you could find something around those rents, but it's getting harder and harder. So that's where the subsidies come in.
Okay, yeah.
And in some cases, seniors can afford to pay a little bit more than, say, a family, and perhaps they can afford to pay 40 or even 50% of their income, which again allows them a wider variety of housing.
Right.
So with around in Erie County, I took a look at how many subsidized housing properties there are for seniors, and I came up with about 105 properties altogether, and about 75 of those, the rent is based on the individual's income.
Okay.
And that's the good news.
Right.
Because when a property says that the income is or the rent is based on their income, the actual published rent for that apartment might look really high to someone who has limited income, but they will be paying a portion of their income. And normally that is set at about 30% of their monthly income. And the rest is subsidized by either the state or the federal government. So there is quite a bit of the housing. Probably the bad news is there are waiting lists for almost any kind of subsidized housing.
Okay.
With the graying of America and certainly the graying of Western New York, we do see a lot more housing of this type being built across the country, and there's a very active group of developers here in Western New York who continue to try to fill the need that we have in Western New York.
Right, right. Now you mentioned waiting lists. Are there do they tend to be more waiting lists in certain areas, certain parts of Western New York?
Yes, and I would be kidding if I said there were not waiting lists for housing that appeals to the lower income. And in some cases, you'll see something being advertised that they have a short waiting list. A short waiting list could be 6 to 12 months.
Okay.
However, there are long waiting lists that are 8 to 10 months, or 8 to 10 years.
Wow.
Some of these waiting lists. And in fact, at Belmont Housing Resources, one of our largest programs is a tenant-based rental assistance program that unfortunately is so oversubscribed right now that we're not even able to help new people for a number of years.
Wow.
So these properties that have subsidized rents become more and more important for seniors who need something now.
Right.
One of the good places to look for this housing, there's two places that I came up with. Of course, Belmont Housing Resources would be the best place to look for something. But I noticed in the supermarkets on the racks that are there, there are several publications that are about rental housing, and one in particular that the Buffalo News puts out is a free publication, comes out quarterly, has a really nice section at the back of that booklet that lists out probably, there might be 30 or 40 apartment complexes that are listed there, many of which have rent based on income. So I would suggest to people who are looking for rental housing for their moms or their grandparents to check there right away. There's some very good information.
Right.
And I also mentioned Belmont, so of course we'll talk a little bit more about that,
Sure.
I'm sure. But we have quite an extensive list of housing that would be available for the lowest income folks.
Right. And does Belmont actually have their own senior housing
We do.
projects?
Belmont does have approximately, I think we have 15 properties for seniors, and they're for a wide range of incomes, from very low income on up to what would be considered low to moderate income.
Right.
But we do a lot of housing counseling and a lot of referrals to everyone else's properties as well. So although we like to be able to refer people to the apartments that we own and manage, we're a very small segment of the entire population. There are over 100 properties throughout Erie County, 15 of them being owned by us. People Incorporated is quite a big player in this particular market, as is Delta Development, which is a division of the Diocese of Buffalo. Some very good housing by all three of those, Belmont and those other two providers.
Right, right. When you just to clarify too, what is the age cutoff, or what is the age you have to be for this senior
Oh, that's
housing?
a good question, because there is quite a bit of difference in some of these properties. Some are available to people who are 55. Others, you have to be 62 in order to get into those apartments. Most of the ones that are 55 and above tend not to be rent based on income.
Okay.
They tend to have a rent that would be lower than the market, but not based on income. And quite often when you get to 62, then you'll see that a lot of these properties are rent based on income.
Okay.
And the list that we put out for people to use shows which one has rent based on income, which has just a lower than market rent.
Great, great. And people can get that list on your website?
Yes, they can.
Or by calling?
Yes, they can go to our website, or they can give us a call and just ask to have the Affordable Housing Opportunities list sent to them, and we'd be happy to get it out to them in the mail.
Wonderful. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
We'll be right back with more Aging is for Everyone.